Beča koji je dobro poznat našoj stručnoj javnosti, dr. Manoschek. On je profesor na političkim naukama u Bečkom univerzitetu i njegove istraživanja pokrivaju istoriju nacionalnog socijalizma, studije holokausta i politike sećanja. U isto vreme on je poznat i autor dokumentarnih filmova koji pokrivaju ovaj spektar njegovih naučnih istraživanja. Ovdje imate listu publikacija. Nama je poznata i ima izuzetno veliko značaj za naše ove probleme kojima se bavimo. Knjiga koja je u stvari proistekla iz njegove doktorske disertacije Serbien ist Juden frei. Srbija je očišćena od Jevreja, i zapravo to je jedna od veoma važnih knjiga koje pokrivaju dobar deo onoga što je naše današnje istraživanje. Tema njegove izlaganje SS-Untersturmfurer Herbert Andorfer, Camp Commandant of Sajmište, dakle SS-Untersturmfurer Andorfer, komandant Logora Sajmište. Please, Dr.
Thank you for the nice words, and I'm sorry that I couldn't understand what others have told us now, because my throat doesn't exist. It's a shame, but it is like it is. In my presentation, I will outline the career of Herbert Andorfer, an SS-Untersturmfurer, which was the rank of a lieutenant colonel, who was the camp commander during the period of gassing of the Jewish inmates of the Sajmište concentration camp, from March to May 1942. In doing so, I will focus on the period of his stay in Serbia. Herbert Andorfer was born in Linz, in Austria, in 1911. When he arrived in Serbia in the fall of 1941, he had a typical SS career behind him. As early as 1931, at the age of 20, he had joined the NSDAP. That was 2 years before the Nazi Party in Germany took power. In 1933, he became a member of the SS, so we can say Andorfer was a hardcore Nazi from the very beginning. Shortly after Austria's annexation by the German Reich, Andorfer enlisted in 1938 in the security service, which was the SS intelligence and agent apparatus for investigating political opponents and the population. He was described by his superiors in 1939 as follows, quotation, Andorfer has an impeccable character. He's reliable, sincere, loyal, and camaraderie. His basic attitude and bearing are in line with the National Socialist worldview. End of quotation. In October 1941, he arrived in Serbia. His first assignment took him to the Sabac camp. About 1,200 men were interned there. Andorfer's task was to find out which people were Chetniks. These were shot in the course of the hostage killings. His activity in Sabac ended in January 1942 when he was entrusted with the management of the Sajmište concentration camp. There were at that time about 7,500 people, mostly Jewish women, children, and elderly people, were interned from 1941 on. In the fall of 1941, the adult male Jews in Serbia were shot as hostages by Wehrmacht firing squads as part of the so-called atonement measures for attacks by partisans against the occupying troops. While these executions were still being carried out, representatives of the Foreign Office and the Reichssicherheitshauptamt in Berlin were already discussing the fate of the Jewish women and children with the heads of the occupying authorities in Belgrade. As their deportation to the east was not an option until spring 1942 at the earliest, they finally agreed to intern the Jewish women and children, as well as the Roma women and children, in a collection camp in the meantime, and in addition 500 Jews, mostly older men, were to be kept alive so that they could be deployed in the camp as help and orderlies. The former Sajmište backgrounds, located in today's Zemun district of Belgrade, were chosen as the internment site. The site had the disadvantage that it could be seen from the hills of Belgrade. But at this time, secrecy was obviously not an issue. At the beginning of November 1941, the head of the military administration, Herbert, instructed the field and district commanders to, quotation, indicate the approximate number of women and children of Jews and Gypsies with a place of residence and to prepare for the transport to a collecting camp near Belgrade. End of quotation. The highest Wehrmacht officer in the Balkans was also informed of this intention. The Counterintelligence Office of the Southeast Commander-in-Chief, the highest rank at the Balkan, he noted, quotation, all Jews and Gypsies will be transferred to a concentration camp near Zemlin. They were demonstrably the careers of the insurgents' intelligence service. End of quotation. With this absurd military justification, the Wehrmacht legitimized the transfer of responsibility for the fate of these people to the security police. In December 1941, all Jews still living in Belgrade had to report to the German police. They were then transferred by truck to the Sajmište camp. They were followed by the Roma women and children in mid-December. The next group to be interned in the camp were the approximately 750 till 800 Jewish women and children of the so-called Kladovo transport, most of whom came from Vienna. When the prisoners arrived, the camp was only half completed by the organization TOT. Of the estimated total costs of 330,000 Reichsmark for the camp construction, only 108,000 Reichsmark had been used by December 16, 1941. One inmate described the condition of the camp, quotation. It's like this here. I don't know how to characterize it in one word. A large stable for 5,000 or more people, without a wall, without a fence, all in the same room. The conditions in the camp were chaotic. Hundreds of people ran around in panic to find a place to sleep. Children and babies screamed and cried. The sick wailed, and old people fell over wherever they were. Apart from 2 wells, the camp had no sanitary facilities. There were scuffles between overexcited mothers trying to protect their children from the old. The windows were broken. The walls cracked and snow fell through the leaky roof onto the concrete floor where puddles froze. Every day, more women and children from all over Serbia arrived at the camp. Pavilion 3 was soon filled to bursting point, so that around 500 prisoners were transferred to a second building. After some time, the organization taught set up 3-story wooden frames in the barracks as sleeping quarters. Camp inmate Charlotte Kosic described the condition of the dormitories, quotation. Each of us was allocated about half a meter of space to sleep. Climbing up to the 3rd floor was very dangerous. The women, especially the older and exhausted ones, often fell off the ladder and injured themselves badly. Some of them died from the injuries. The dampness on the walls froze, and we felt like we were in an icebox. From the beds on the upper floors, the children's excrement fell on those below. And the straw we slept on, which was never changed, began to stink and rot. We were given no sheets or blankets, and those who had not brought their own froze to death during the night. End of quotation. The Viennese Jew Anna Hecht, who was transferred to Sajmište as a member of the Kladovo transport, described life in the camp, quotation. There were around 7,000 women and very few men in this camp. The camp had been set up on the Belgrade exhibition grounds and was very large. The women mostly worked in the camp itself, some in the kitchen, some in the sewing room. I myself worked in the camp hospital. When we arrived, it was a harsh winter, and one of our first jobs was to break up the Sava River. The camp was administered by the SS, but there was a Jewish camp administration. There were also Jews from Serbia and Gypsies in the camp. They had it much worse than we did. They also got very little to eat, just what was left over from us. Just like the expansion of the camp, the expenses for administration and supplies were also financed from the looted Jewish assets. The head of the military administration, responsible for the camp administration, Turner, decided, quotation, that the total Jewish assets were liable for the expenses incurred in maintaining the Jewish camp. End of quotation. The Belgrade Welfare Office was responsible for the camp rations. A rations list illustrates the terrible state of supplies. In the first 16 days until Christmas Eve 1941, the camp was supplied with 1,500 kilograms of beans, 2,700 kilograms of cabbage, half of which was spoiled, 100 kilograms of fat, 3,600 kilos of potatoes, 50 kilo of flour and 1,500 kilo of onions, half of which was also spoiled, and 36 kilos of peppers. That's 6,000 kilograms of food for 5,300 people in 16 days, or 80 grams per person per day. Deutsch, who worked as a nurse, recorded the mood in the camp in her letters, quotation. We, the inmates, turn into wild beasts of hunger. We are stubborn, irritable, and are constantly counting our neighbors' bits. We are desperate. End of quotation. Temperatures hit rock bottom in January 1942. The great dying began. At first, it was mostly children and older women who died. Initially 10, then up to 25 people per night. The physical collapse went hand in hand with the psychological collapse. Hilde Deutsch wrote, quotation, "You don't know what I didn't know either, what it means to be here. And I don't want you to ever know. What are their intentions for us? I'm in constant tension. Will they shoot us, blow us up, ship us off to Poland? Even as a child, I feared that one day I would be buried alive. And this is something like I faked death." End of quotation. In mid-March 1942, a gassing truck arrived in Belgrade from Berlin. All the Jewish inmates of the camp were to be killed in the converted Sauber truck. Immediately before this, the 292 interned Roma women and children were released from the camp. The head of the security police and the Sicherheitsdienst in Serbia, SS-Untersturmfurer Dr. Emanuel Schäfer, instructed the Gestapo to carry out the mass murder. The SS-Untersturmfurer Herbert Andorfer, the Sajmište concentration camp commander, was entrusted with the actual implementation of the gassing operation. He developed a plan that was as simple as it was diabolic in order to ensure the gassing went as smoothly as possible. Andorfer in his trial, quotation, "Before the operation began, I had new notices put up in the camp and informed the inmates that the resettlement would not be carried out to the east, but as a temporary stopover on Yugoslav territory." End of quotation. Andorfer also drew up fiction camp regulations for the allegedly new camp and posted them in the concentration camp in Sajmište. To leave no doubt, Andorfer gave instructions that the prisoners could take the luggage with them, and that a Jewish doctor and nurse would be assigned to each transport to look after the passengers' health. In their ignorance, the prisoners assumed that any local change would only bring an improvement on the conditions in the Sajmište concentration camp, and volunteered for the supposed resettlement. For the Jewish victims, the deception was a complete success. Just a few days before the end of the gassings, a Jewish prisoner child told a Serbian prisoner who had just been admitted to the camp and inquired about the whereabouts of Jewish acquaintances. Quotation. Oh yes, they were here, but they were recently taken to Poland. All of us were sent to the ghetto there. We have heard that life there will be much better. The adults will work there and we, the children, will go to school there. Most of us have already left and are eagerly waiting to follow them. End of quotation. Between mid-March and early May 1942, 2 trucks drove to the Sajmište concentration camp every morning, with the exception of Sundays. The smaller of the 2 trucks drove into the camp and stopped in front of the Commandant's building. The prisoners who had volunteered for resettlement the previous evening were already waiting there. Andorfer advised those waiting to quotation, Andorfer, only take the most valuable things with you. He gave this end of quotation. He gave this advice in a friendly manner, explaining that it would be taken to work in another better camp, where the food would be good, even very good. The group of prisoners stowed the luggage in the truck and then walked unsuspectingly to the grey-painted silver truck waiting for them in front of the camp. One of the 2 drivers handed out sweets to the children before loading them in, so that the children always gathered quickly around the gas lamp and loaded proceeded swiftly. The group of prisoners stowed their luggage in the truck and then walked unsuspiciously to the grey-painted silver truck. One of the 2 drivers handed out sweets, as I told you, and in the approximately 10 square meter interior of the car, about 10 benches were set up across the width, on which about 50 to 80 people were seated. Then the rear wing door of the van was closed. The gas car set off in the direction of the southern bridge. Behind it followed the luggage van and the car of the concentration camp commandant, Herbert Andorfer. After the convoy had crossed the southern bridge, the luggage van turned off and delivered the victims' belongings to the Belgrade depot of the National Socialist People's Welfare. The gas van stopped briefly and one of the 2 drivers turned a lever which now directed the exhaust fumes into the interior of the van. During the following journey across Belgrade to the destination of Avala, about 15 kilometers southeast of the Serbian capital, the Jewish victims were gassed in the van. On his journey from the camp to the burial site, Herbert Andorfer was usually accompanied by his adjutant, SS-Untersturmfurer Edgar Enge. In his post-war trial, Enge described the unloading of the gas Jews. Quotation, the burial of the gas Jews always took place in the same era. The gas van drove up to the vicinity of the pit. After opening the door, it could be seen that the corpses also usually lay more in the rear part of the van's interior. The prisoners then transported the bodies into the pits and covered with earth. The gas van made its deadly journeys for 2 months. After the Jewish men in Serbia had been shot by Wehrmacht firing squads in the fall of 1941, there were approximately 7,000 Jews interned in the Sajmište concentration camp also fell victim to the murder of the Jews by the beginning of 1942. After the murder campaign was completed, Herbert Andorfer was deployed to fight partisans in Albania until the end of 1942. He then returned to Salzburg before being transferred to the security police in northern Italy in July 1943. As Sonderkommando Andorfer, he committed serious crimes against Italian civilians under the guise of fighting partisans. In the fall of 1943, Andorfer was transferred to Italy and appointed commander of the anti-gang unit named after him. Until the end of the war, Andorfer's mobile commander of the security police was involved in numerous operations against alleged partisans. At last, Andorfer was awarded the War Merit Cross II class with swords in 1942, the Iron Cross II class 1944, and the Iron Cross First class 1945. Andorfer, who in the final phase of the war in 1945 was either in a hospital in Como near the Italian border or in a Swiss hospital due to an injury as part of gang operation, as it was said in the later trial. Arrived from there on a red line via Sweden and New York with false papers under the name Hans Meyer, he came to Venezuela in 1946 and was naturalized there. He later returned to Austria with his false identity. He worked again as a hotel secretary under his real name and was renaturalized by the Republic of Austria with his identity. He traveled a lot as he was a tour guide and spent a lot of time abroad, so his identity was constantly checked. Since 1964, there had been investigations into the crimes in the Sajmište concentration camp and into Andorfer's role. In May 1967, he was taken into custody, and on January 3rd, 1969, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison by the Dortmund Regional Court of aiding and abetting the murder of at least 5,500 Jewish prisoners from the Sajmište concentration camp, the Gasmen. The court was of the opinion that quotation, the statutory minimum sentence of 3 years in prison for complicity in murder could be undercut because the mitigating factors clearly predominate and the double mitigation option had to be taken into account. So an error in the prohibition cannot be ruled out, and ultimately the otherwise blameless Andorfer was suffered a harsh post-war fate as a result of his aiding and abetting the criminal killing of thousands. He became completely homeless. Imprisonment is also worse for older people than the younger people. End of quotation from the attorney. Since Andorfer's pre-trial detention in Austria and Germany was given full credit, he was released again at the end of the trial. Since he was, quotation, not of a dishonorable mind at the time of the crime, his honorary civil rights were not revoked. Thank you for your attention.